I'm a little up, but will you take care of me forever and ever?
I say to this day, and I do it based on my reaction. Obviously, this is personal. I say it's the greatest knockout of all time. First time I ever stood up, I couldn't sit down. I was standing up. I was just like, oh!
I saw that. I saw you stand up. That's the first time I see
It was just, what?
I'm expecting him the last 6 rounds with AJ. In my opinion, he won 4 of them. People argue that he at least won 3.
The moment Anthony Joshua's right hand connected with Jake Paul's jaw in the 6th round, the air seemed to leave the arena, replaced instantly by a collective gasp that rippled through the millions watching worldwide. It was a sound that signaled the end of a chaotic experiment and the return of cold, hard reality to the sport of boxing. Even Joe Rogan, a man who has witnessed thousands of fights and countless knockouts from ringside, found himself unable to remain seated.
And it almost, oh, there's a left hook. Oh, down goes Paul!
And his chin served on a platter for that right hand right there. And look at Jake Paul's face.
This sport has helped me so much in my life. I think my jaw is broken, by the way, so yeah.
Let's go!
It's definitely broke.
I'm a little fucked up, but will you take care of me forever and ever?
His reaction was visceral, a physical rejection of the violence he had just witnessed. He stood up, eyes wide, processing what he later described as perhaps the greatest knockout of all time. It wasn't just the punch itself, it was the finality of it, the way it shattered the illusions that had been carefully built up over months of hype and promotion.
Broke his jaw, he's fine. We met with Netflix afterwards. He took a shower, he drove himself to the hospital. A broken jaw is very common in sports, particularly in boxing or MMA, and I think the recovery time from the doctors and surgeons we've already talked to is 4 to 6 weeks.
The true extent of the damage surfaced just hours later, and the visuals were nothing short of graphic. A double fracture, not a hairline crack or a minor break, but a complete structural failure of the jawbone.
Rogan noted that for the first time in his commentary career, he was physically compelled to stand, unable to sit down as the gravity of the heavyweight power echoed through the venue. He had warned the audience, he had warned the listeners, but seeing the deviation in real time was a different beast entirely. It was a moment that transcended the fight itself, becoming a snapshot of brutality that would likely define the event forever. The match, billed as Judgment Day, was never truly about two equals stepping into the square circle. It was a collision of two different worlds.
Win tonight in Miami. How are you feeling right now?
Calm, chilled, good to get the win, but there's a lot I could have done better. So a bit of mixed emotion.
Like what?
Could have done a lot better, cut the ring off, maybe done what I done in the 6th, in the 3rd, in the 2nd, even in the 1st. But a win's a win. And that's why we're here talking now.
You talked about having the weight of the boxing world on your shoulders and like the purists, right?
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that type of pressure when the media is so fickle? 1 minute they love you, 1 minute they hate you. Do you feel that even though you won tonight, they're still not going to be pleased?
So with the media, how I operate the media is you got negative and you got positive. So I do honestly focus on the positive. I don't really focus on the negative. And secondly, I just understand that while I'm in the hot seat, so let's say there's a seat, and right now I'm elevated to that hot seat, I gotta take all the shit that comes with being in that hot seat, and then once I move on from that hot seat, no one's gonna care about me anyway. So I just gotta
That's not true.
It's true, it's how it goes. It's how it goes, so I know how it works. I understand the cycle. I'm currently in that motion. I'm dealing with some shit at the minute, but it won't last forever. Have some tough skin, and then in a couple of years, I'll be sitting back watching someone else deal with that shit. Thank you, come on, champ, have some tough skin, you'll be alright.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much
Good
for your
to
time.
see you, Michelle.
Great to see you too.
Fight fans, God bless.
The gritty, lifelong grind of Olympic-level heavyweight boxing and the flashy, curated world of influencer combat sports. Anthony Joshua walked into the ring as a 2-time unified heavyweight champion, a man who had dedicated his life to this sweet science. At 6'6" and weighing in at a formidable 243 pounds, he was a physical titan compared to Paul. Jake Paul, the disruptor, the YouTuber-turned-prize fighter, weighed in at 216 pounds, giving up nearly 30 pounds of muscle and mass, not to mention inches in height and reach. The disparity was not just visible, it was palpable. Yet, the narrative leading up to the fight had somehow convinced a segment of the population that a fairy tale ending was possible. There were people, as noted by observers, who truly believed the problem child could overcome a generational heavyweight talent. Friends were texting friends, placing $20 bets on the underdog, buying into a fantasy that dissolved the moment the first bell rang. For the first few rounds, however, the massacre that many predicted was delayed. Jake Paul entered the ring with a strategy that could best be described as frantic survival. He moved around the canvas with a speed that Joe Rogan characterized as 100 miles per hour, a desperate attempt to keep the massive British heavyweight from planting his feet and letting his hands go. It was a game of cat and mouse, where the mouse was keenly aware that a single mistake meant oblivion. Paul clinched, he circled, he made himself small, and he refused to engage in the kind of firefight that would have ended his night in seconds. For a moment, it looked like frustration might set in for Joshua. The champion stalked his prey, cutting off the ring where he could, but often finding himself tangling with a smaller man who was more interested in holding than hitting. Critics would later argue that Paul won a few of these early rounds simply by virtue of activity and spoiling tactics, a moral victory in a fight where physical victory was a statistical impossibility, but the laws of physics and physiology are immutable in the heavyweight division. The frantic movement that kept Paul safe in the first 9 minutes began to drain his gas tank. You cannot sprint a marathon, and you cannot dance around a heavyweight champion forever.
I thought it was a bitch move.
By the fifth round,
if I'm honest,
the dynamic shifted perceptibly. Joshua, patient and predatory, began to find his range.
Attack like that,
the pebble hitting a tank analogy used by commentators became terrifyingly accurate. When Paul did land, his punches bounced harmlessly off Joshua's guard or were absorbed with barely a flinch. Conversely, when Joshua began to touch Paul, the effect was immediate. The sheer weight of the champion's body, leaning on the challenger in the clinches, began to sap Paul's remaining energy. Joshua knocked Paul down multiple times in the fifth, not necessarily with flush power shots, but with the overwhelming pressure of his presence and heavy hands. The facade was crumbling. The YouTuber looked sturdy for a novice, but against a master, sturdiness is merely a delay of the inevitable. Then came the sixth round, the moment that justified the price of admission for the purists and horrified the casual fans who had come to love the influencer. Joshua, sensing the exhaustion in his opponent, stopped playing with his food. He unleashed a massive right hand, a punch thrown with the technical perfection of an Olympic gold medalist and the bad intentions of a prizefighter. It connected cleanly. The result was catastrophic for Paul. He was sent crashing to the floor, the fight waved off immediately by the referee, who recognized that this was no longer a sporting contest, but a rescue mission. Anthony Joshua stood tall, his record improving to 29-4, while Jake Paul lay on the canvas, his second career loss stamped not by a decision, but by a devastating embrace of unconsciousness. The aftermath was a mixture of concern and bizarre celebration of toughness. In the post-fight chaos, it was revealed that the damage to Paul was severe. He hadn't just been knocked out, his jaw was broken. Later, Paul would post an X-ray on social media confirming a double fracture, a gruesome injury that usually requires weeks of wiring the mouth shut and months of recovery. He had driven himself to the hospital, adrenaline likely masking the worst of the pain, but the medical reality was a stark reminder of the danger he had courted. A broken jaw is a career-altering injury for many boxers, a trauma that changes how a fighter reacts to being hit forever. Yet, in the strange ecosystem of modern boxing, this injury was worn like a badge of honor by his camp. His brother, Logan Paul, expressed immense pride, noting that Jake had lasted 6 rounds with one of the baddest men on the planet. He pointed out that world-class heavyweights like Francis Ngannou hadn't survived that right hand, yet his brother, a YouTuber, had eaten shots and kept moving until the bitter end. Anthony Joshua's reaction was complex. He was the victor, the dominant force, yet he seemed unsatisfied. In his post-fight interview, he admitted that while he got the knockout, he didn't feel he had performed to his full potential. He spoke of psychological warfare and his intention to take Paul's soul, to make him quit. While he achieved the physical destruction of his opponent, The slippery nature of the early rounds seemed to annoy the perfectionist in him. He called the win a result rather than a success, highlighting the immense pressure elite fighters put on themselves. However, Joshua was gracious enough to acknowledge the heart of his opponent. He noted that most men would never dare to step through the ropes to face him, let alone a man giving up so much weight and experience. He credited Paul for his resilience, for getting up when he was knocked down, and for trying to fight back even when he was clearly outgunned. It was a respectful nod from a king to a jester who had shown he wasn't entirely a joke. The promoter's spin machine went into overdrive immediately. Nikisa Bidarian, Paul's business partner at MVP, framed the loss not as a failure of skill, but as a triumph of spirit against impossible physical odds. He argued that Jake might have been winning the fight on the scorecards before the knockout, a claim that drew skepticism from boxing purists but resonated with Paul's fanbase. Bidarian emphasized the size difference, stating that Joshua's mass and power were simply too much to overcome, implying that pound for pound, the skill gap wasn't as wide as the results suggested. He praised the fact that Paul, on just 4 weeks of preparation, stood toe-to-toe with a legend. This narrative was crucial for the business of Jake Paul. He had to remain a viable combat sports product even in defeat. By framing the loss as a heroic last stand against a giant, they preserved his marketability for future fights, perhaps against opponents more his own size. However, the boxing establishment was less generous in its assessment. Eddie Hearn, the seasoned promoter who has guided Joshua's career, offered a pragmatic, almost cold analysis. He dismissed the idea that Paul had exposed any flaws in Joshua or that the YouTuber had shown elite boxing ability. To Hearn, lasting 6 rounds was less about Paul's skill and more about Joshua's rust and patience. He described the fight as a pebble hitting a tank, a phrase that perfectly encapsulated the futility of Paul's offense. Hearn made it clear that while he respected the hustle and the bravery, this should not become the norm. He argued that fights with such massive disparities in experience and ability should not be sanctioned regularly. It was a spectacle, a one-off event that made money and entertained a specific demographic, but it was an elite sport. The gap between an internet celebrity and a 2-time unified heavyweight champion was exactly as wide as everyone with boxing knowledge said it would be.